How's it going? This is Haterade, back with you on my own channel. This channel for now, I will be discussing the early years, before I was MGTOW. The experiences that put me on the path that I am on now. We will start from the beginning, the very beginning. One could say it started before even my father was born. But I'm not going to go back that far. I'm going to go as far back as before my conception. That's about as far as it deserves to go. In the late 80s or early 90s, a young man met a woman in a bar. This woman was not my mother, but this man was my father. This was my father's first wife. While he was in the military, he married this woman from the great state of California. And by great, well, you know what I mean. And by bar, in California, that's about as low, bottom of the barrel as you can get. He married this woman, and eventually he divorced her, or she divorced him. The simple fact that she treated the animals better than her husband is a good enough reason to be divorced. And one would think this man would learn his lesson from this first woman. But let's flash all the way to 1997. This young man, now in his 30s, walks into a restaurant, and one of the ladies over there working at that restaurant happened to be my mother. And this was a fast food restaurant. My mother was instantly attracted to my father because he was a bad boy. And any true MGTOW will know that women love the bad boys. Little did my mother know, this bad boy image that my father put up was simply an act, because deep down, he was a white knighting simp. My father thought he had it good at first. He was pounding this woman, banging her up night and up day. But he must have been blind, as they say love is blind. And my mother was nothing special to look at. In fact, one could say she hit the wall before there was a wall to even hit. She was walled out and stalled out before any of us kids came around. My father didn't necessarily want kids. He just wanted to get some of that sweet, sweet poontang. Instead, I think he got some nasty fruit that was lying out in the sun for too many days. But he thought it was so sweet. This woman, my mother, wanted children. My father not necessarily. And along came, in the year 1998, my mother was pregnant. But this child ended up being a miscarriage. And from my understanding, my mother was not devastated from the miscarriage, but my father was torn out from the inside when this baby, this fetus, did not survive. That right there shows you the true nature of my mother. That right there shows you that at least my father has some decency within his hard shell of a shallow man. The year's 1999. Along came the worst nightmare to ever hit this world. my mother was pregnant with me. Things were pretty great after I was born, it seemed. In fact, I can vividly remember a time before my sisters were born. I must have been 1 or 2 at the time. Life seemed happy when I was younger. Then my sisters came along. Things didn't really seem to change. My mother had a near-death experience while birthing them. There were some complications within the birth that would have most likely killed my mother if not the doctor had been there to help. My dad, scared of the thought of losing 2 of his children and his woman. But little did he know that this, what seemed to be the great life, the perfect life, would all be ripped out underneath him. Flash to 2003. My mother is pregnant again. This time with my little brother. When my little brother was born, that's when things started to change. After my brother was born, it seemed as if my mother was no longer interested in my father. My father did do some fatherly things for us when we were younger, but it must have been like a phase to him. When I was younger, I was heavily into dinosaurs. And when we moved out of our crappy home and moved out into the country, there were some old cow bones lying out in the yard. Nothing obvious as a cow to a child, so my father went and buried them, and he told me he saw something sticking out of the ground. He said it might be a fossil, who knows? So I run over there, and I start digging up the bones, and I'm so excited because I thought I have discovered a fossilized dinosaur. Stuff like that, the small things, is what made my life seem so great when I was younger. In fact, when I was 3-4 years old, no, I was 4. I was 4 at the time because my brother was around. My father took us to a museum. They were exhibiting dinosaurs, and I was so excited. When I was younger, this was the small things that made my life so great. My father would feed me this stuff about dinosaurs because I so much loved dinosaurs and Godzilla and Spider-Man and Batman and rock and roll. But as time progressed on, I believe the year 2006, my mother began sleeping around with other men. Who knows if she did it before then when she was with him? But I think so. I think she did. But it didn't come to the light until then. I'm guessing my mother was no longer attracted to my father because he wasn't being such a bad boy. He showed a much softer side around his children. Of course, that was whenever things were all jolly and good. After that, things changed. I've noticed my parents were screaming at each other all the time and screaming at us kids all the time, and we'd get spanked all the time. Of course, we might have been a little rotten beforehand and got a couple of spankings we deserved. But we were children. We were being children, and my parents were being parents. Up until that first time my dad found out my mother was sleeping around. Eventually, it got to the point where my mother would purposely push my father's buttons because she knew he had anger issues. There was times whenever she would do things that she knew would drive my father to the edge, and one day it worked. My father had chased my mother around the house. She was barefoot, and he had shoes on, she was running through stickers and thorns. Pretty hilarious, because that's what whores deserve. My father was then sent to jail, and I didn't see him for a month. Then when I finally saw my dad again, I was so happy. It felt I hadn't seen him in an entire year. Time was different when I was a child. Time went by much slower, it seemed. And when I saw my dad, it was the greatest treat I have seen in a long time. He had gotten us little gifts, but I didn't care about the gifts. I cared about finally being able to see my dad again. I thought that was the end of it. I thought everything would go back to normal and everything would be perfect. But no. We haven't even scraped the surface. Eventually, my mother went back to her old ways and slept around, and my dad knew about this. But instead of being the man he once was, he became a little simp and white-knighted after her. And instead of confronting her about these incidents, he would confront the men she was sleeping around and issue threats to them. So many things to go on and on about. This will be the first part of the early years. Let me know in the comments below if you enjoy these videos. I will do another part to this, and I will continue on the story. I'll see you soon.